We all have times in our life when things change, and so often those things don't really change for the better. Today we're going to start working through the life of Joseph in the book of Genesis, and we're going to learn from him a few things. And here they are. God has not forgotten you, no matter what's happening in your life. God is intricately involved in whatever is going on in your life. Things may not seem to make sense now, but God is always up to something. Join us today. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Genesis series. We are always glad you join us. Today we are working through Genesis like normal, and we're finally going to get to the place in Genesis that I love, and it is this story, this story of the life of Joseph. And there are so many lessons that we can learn from him. And what we're going to learn today is that no matter what you're going through, whether it's good or bad or tragedy or heartbreak, that we're going to see that Joseph went through those exact things. Good times, bad times, tragedy, and heartbreak. And what we're going to learn is that it's what we talked about last week, that when it comes to God and the Bible, there is this big story, but it's not just a story like a fairy tale story. It's like a book of facts. It's factual. All of these events did happen, and God has a reason for it happening so that we can learn about Him. So that's where we're going to go a little bit today. So I want to set up the story of Joseph. And what I want to do is, we were in church quite a few weeks ago, and one of the pastors, his name is Kevin Newell, he did this intro, and he talked about when the Super Bowl was here, and there was something that happened to him. And as I sat there listening, I thought, okay, this is really good. I want to play this clip at Bible study so that you can kind of get where we're going today. So we go to a church called Highlands out in Scottsdale, and I'm going to play this clip for you so you can kind of see where we're going today. So watch this.
We could get tickets for were Saturday. And so I decided, you know what, we're gonna Disneyland this thing. We're gonna get there before it opens, be the first ones in the gate, try and experience everything it has to offer us before the masses show up. And when everyone else gets there, we'll have done it all and be out. So we get in the car, tickets get us in the gate at 10. So we get in the car, we pull into the parking lot about 9:12. Plenty of time to be first in line. I get out the car, look around, and the mass of humanity that has already infiltrated downtown Phoenix blows my mind. And my little 10-year-old Caden's like, Dad, hurry up, we gotta go, we gotta get in. All right, bud, calm down. Follow the herd. And so like sheep, we just follow the masses. And about 2 minutes from the car, I get a text on my phone that says, you need to download this app in order to be able to partake in anything that's going on inside. Now, I don't want to be the dad that's sitting there when my 10-year-old's like, I want to go do that. Hold on, son, I got to figure out how to. So as we're walking, I'm on my phone trying to get the password correct for the NFL One app. I can't remember what 18-digit code I put in there when I signed up forever ago. And so we're going, following the herd. I got my head down in my phone. Finally, right as we come around the corner to the gates of the NFL experience, I guess the right password, and we are in. And we get in there, and man, we are kicking field goals, we are catching punts, we are throwing balls into giant hoops and diving into tackling dummies. I mean, it was great. He loved it. About 1:45-ish, it got so crowded you couldn't move without doing this. And so he looks at me and goes, Dad, I'm getting kind of hungry, finally. Let's go get something to eat. I said, what do you want to eat? They got lots of stuff here. He goes, Dad, I kind of want In-N-Out. See, that's good discipleship right there. I said, all right, bud, let's leave and let's go to In-N-Out. And so we kick open the doors to the exit and we walk outside, and all of a sudden I realize I don't have any idea where we parked. And I look this way and there's a bunch of gray and brown buildings, and I look at this way and there's a bunch of brown and gray buildings. And Caden says, Dad, I'm hungry, let's go. All right, son, it's this way. And so off we go. And we must have walked, I don't know, downtown Phoenix is an interesting place, but it gets more and more interesting the further out you get from the events that are taking place. So we got to a not so safe part of and I said, this ain't it, we got to go back. So we go back the other way, and I said, it must have been this way. So we go down this way, maybe another 3 blocks. No, this isn't it. An hour and 15 minutes we spend circling downtown Phoenix looking for my car. And my little 10-year-old is taking in all that downtown Phoenix has to offer, which is a lot for a 10-year-old little boy. You're seeing some things that you don't normally see up here. And he's starting to get hungry, and he's starting to get a little overwhelmed by everything that's going on. And I can get a little frustrated and discouraged. And so in an act of humility, I call Brooke. I say, Brooke, here's the deal. I can't find the car. You're going to have to come down and pick us up and drive us around till we can find it. And Brooke says, oh, okay, that's perfect. I'm at my parents' house. I'll send my dad. I want to hand my man card over to my father-in-law and say, I don't know where the car is. Thanks for driving me around for an hour. So I tell Brooke, that's all right, I'll figure it out. Hang up on her. We sit down on the ground. We're sitting on the street in downtown Phoenix up against this wall. And I got my phone out, and the map is nothing but a bunch of blue lines and presidents' names. I don't know where I'm going. And then I realized there's a little button on the right side of my Google Maps that if you hit it, all of a sudden, it can take you to satellite view. So I hit that button, and all of a sudden, the buildings that were in front of me that I could not see around, that I couldn't get past, that I had no idea what was on the other side, all of a sudden, I'm looking down from 80,000 feet, and I see us, and I see the giant square buildings between us and what looks like a parking lot where we parked. So I tell Caden, one last try, bud, follow me, we're gonna find it. And about 5 minutes later, sure enough, there it is, gray Toyota Corolla. We did it! Hopped in that car, ate copious amounts of In-N-Out, and saved my dignity for a little bit, right? I tell you that story to say this, sometimes I don't know if life's really a whole lot different. We're down here in the midst of our smaller story, and we are sitting on a street looking at a bunch of buildings and having no idea what the future holds, what's on the other side, or where we are going. And the God of the universe is up there 80,000 feet above writing a much larger story, and we're just a part of it. And in the midst of us going, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go, maybe there's some promises in God's word that might be an encouragement to us. Because when we find ourselves in those moments and we're panicked and we're afraid and we're anxious and we don't know what's going on and we feel out of control, there's great comfort to know that the God of the universe is looking down upon us going, I got you. I'm in this.
I thought that was like super cute, but I think it helps us understand this whole idea of this bigger story, this 30,000 foot view that God sees that so often we don't. We can't see through the buildings. We can't see what's on the other side of what's going on with our trial. But it's really comforting to know that God is doing something from his vantage point that actually to us might not even make sense at the moment, but it does to him. And we can rest on that fact. Which is why I love the story of Joseph, because for so much of his life, I bet he felt like Kevin did when he was trying to find his car. Like you're just flying blind. You just can't remember. You don't know what's going on. And I bet for Joseph, he was so confused at his circumstances that I can't imagine that he even knew what God was doing at all. And yet in hindsight, when we read the Bible, we see that what didn't make sense to Joseph at the time, we actually can see the big picture, in hindsight. And what that tells us is that no matter what we're going through, we can rest in the fact of this, that God is up to something. He's up to something. Now, years ago, Rob and I wrote a book, and we called it The Equation, okay? And it was actually on the life of Joseph. And I always thought that Joseph's life reminded me of like a tornado, okay? Our son moved to Texas with his family, and they sent us one time like, okay, there's a tornado warning, and there's all this going on, and he was showing us pictures through the window, and then he showed us this little picture of this tornado, and I was like, what? Like, you need to move back to Phoenix. Like, that was my first thought. But life is kind of like that. It's like 1 minute, it was sunny in Texas, all right? And then suddenly there's a cloud, and then the cloud gets bigger, and then it becomes blacker, and all of a sudden this thing comes out of the sky, and it's like a tornado, and it just literally moves into its destruction phase. And sometimes I think that's what happens in our life. It's like you wake up in the morning and you do just like you do every day. But then something happens that feels like a tornado and it just rocks your entire world. Maybe it's the husband who says, I'm just done with you. I'm done with this marriage. I'm walking out. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's the addiction, that you just can't kick. Maybe it's an illness. Maybe it's literally a physical illness. Or maybe you go into work and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't need you anymore. And you get laid off from your job. Or maybe it's, you did something bad and the judge says you're guilty, you're going to jail. I mean, it could be anything, but it's that moment when this storm of life comes crashing in on us. But here's what we learned from Joseph, that when the skies become dark and the wind starts howling all around us and the rains begin pouring, we have a choice on how we will respond. That we do. We have one, and so did he. Now for us in Phoenix, Arizona, we don't really have tornadoes. Every once in a while we have rain. And when I say every once in a while, I kind of really mean that. It doesn't rain very much here, and when it does, it's super fun. But when it does rain, my first question is, oh, should I get my umbrella? But better yet, my question is, where is my umbrella? I don't even remember from the last rain where I even put it, okay? But this made me laugh. I found a joke on an umbrella, so I'll have to tell you this. There was a man who was, he had this habit of carrying an umbrella everywhere he went. And he had a bunch of them. He had 10 umbrellas. But unfortunately, his very last umbrella broke. So he decided to take all 10 umbrellas into the repair shop to have them all repaired. So on the bus, returning home, he sat next to a woman who had an umbrella sitting next to her. So just out of sheer habit, he picked up the umbrella because he always had one, and he started walking out, and she started screaming at him on the bus. And she's like, thief, he stole my umbrella. And he was so embarrassed that he just quickly hands it back and then just runs off the bus because he doesn't know what to say to that. Well, the next week, he went to the repair shop and he picked up all 10 of his umbrellas. So he had them all in a bag, and he got on the bus and just happened to sit next to the same lady who thought that he stole her umbrella. And she looked at him and she said really mean, looks like you had a really good day today. She thought he stole them all. But for me, here's the deal. In Phoenix, in the rain, if I didn't take an umbrella with me, I would get wet and cold, and I would kind of be miserable. But it's kind of the same with the circumstances in our life, that we have a choice. I could walk outside, stand in the rain, get wet, and just like I said, be very unhappy. Or I could go with my umbrella and I could get in the rain, but have the umbrella above me, and I can seek shelter that way. And that's how it is with our life. We can turn to God and seek shelter under his umbrella. And that's where we're going to find Joseph. Because for Joseph, we're going to see he eventually goes underneath the umbrella of God's protection. But it all begins with a storm. And some of you need to hear that today, that storms are a part of the Christian life. And it helps us understand how to trust God more, how to just trust him for the things that we can't possibly do in our life. And what we're going to learn from Joseph is that instead of freaking out and being angry and fearful when his life takes a huge turn, we're going to see how he really does turn to God. And when he did that, and when he could find his shelter under God's umbrella, he could find peace amidst the storm to continue on. And he would eventually recognize that he was stronger in his faith than he ever thought he could be. Our daughter, most of you know this, has cancer. And so she just had a mastectomy. Something weird happened, and she had this thing that the doctor had to go and scrape off because it wasn't healing right. And she said it was just not fun. But the doctor said to her something. He said, did you ever think when you first found out that you had cancer that you were strong enough to make it through? And she's like, probably not. A year and a half ago, if you told me oh, you're going to have cancer, she's like, I probably never would have thought that. But now she realizes that she really is strong. And that's what trials do for you. It makes you realize that you're stronger even in your faith than you ever probably thought that you were. Many years ago, Rob and I had a business, and he sold the business for a lot of money. And I say a lot of money, and that sounds dumb, but only because I used to get my nails done, and it would be really like, how am I going to afford to get my nails done? So after he sold the business, someone came up and said, would you like a pedicure? And I was like, oh my gosh, I can afford my nails and a pedicure. So I was super excited about that. But that was kind of short-lived because 2008 hit, the crash, everything crashed. We had our money invested someplace that crashed, and there was that. So we pretty much lost all of our money. But in the midst of this, Rob was in business with 4 of our boys. So we had to worry about payroll and all of those kind of things. And one day I just looked at Rob and I said, I'm so tired of being broke, okay? I'm tired of struggling every week to make payroll, wondering how in the world God is going to provide for us. But you know what made it so bearable? And I think it was realizing this, that God was in our story, that he just was. And I don't think I even really knew that until we had this big financial loss. And it forced me in this financial storm to get underneath God's umbrella. Because I had to learn this, that God is always doing something behind the scene. And so what happened as I grew in my faith and I trusted God more and more, my perspective of life changed. And it didn't mean I hated, being broke, and it didn't mean I, missed getting a pedicure. It didn't mean it was frustrating some days. But what got me through the day was literally God and learning to trust him for our needs instead of trusting our money in our big bank account, learning to rely on him, learning to pray more, seek him more, listen more. And I don't believe that I would trust God today if I didn't go through that financial storm back then. And if you were to ask me, would you change it? Would you take that big bank account now over what you've learned? And the answer would be no. I don't think I would. Because now I know God better. I trust him more. I depend on him more. And I just know he's always in the story. So trials are really good. And if we can look at our trials that way, I think on the other end of it, you will be shocked at how much more your faith has grown so much stronger. So instead of falling apart out there in whatever storm you are in, for us it was a financial storm, instead of being angry with God, and blaming him, why would you make this happen to us? We just wrote it out, and we wrote it out under his umbrella. And that might be a word for you. You may be writing out a storm of hurt, a storm of bitterness, a storm of unforgiveness. And your choice will be to live outside that umbrella. Feel sorry for yourself. Blame your parents, blame that person, blame your teacher, blame your ex, blame your boss. And it's their fault for how my life is turning out. Or you could become like Joseph. And you can get underneath that umbrella of his protection and let him use you in spite of your storm. Because what we're going to learn is what we know in Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his promise. Now, God promises to work everything for good, even the storms in your life. But he says in there that it'll work together for good to those who love God. In other words, to those who have a relationship with God. And the only way to have a relationship with God is through Jesus. John 14:6 says this. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And that always has to be our starting point for getting to know God. There's only one way to know him, and that is through Jesus. It's not through a religion. It's not through, I'm spiritual. It's not through, I'm just a good person. None of those things. It literally is all about Jesus and surrendering your life to him. And once you do that, then you can claim this promise that all things, good or bad, are going to work together for good. And there's so much comfort in knowing that. And in hindsight, we learn that from Joseph's life. So back to our book, The Equation. The reason we wrote this book to begin with is because this storm felt like it was crashing in our life and actually crashing in someone else's life that we knew. And what happened is someone really, really close to us, oh my gosh, was experiencing betrayal by someone that was so shocking that I didn't even know what to do with it. And this, it wasn't like slavery or prison, like Joseph was going to, that kind of betrayal, like Joseph will deal with. But this was like deception and lies from someone so close to this person. And as we watched it, I was really angry. And I was like, I wanted to get involved, and I wanted to like try to help lessen the pain to this person that we loved. And I wanted to defend this person. But it was then that I realized a simple math question, and it changed everything for me. And it changed how I was feeling about this particular problem. One of the first things we learned as a child in school was simple math. Here you go, 1 + 1 = 2. And then you learned 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. And it was the last question, or the last equation, that's why we named it the equation. It changed how I would live out this storm of betrayal that this person was going through. And this is how it looked for us. If I just focused on me and that person's problem, it would be me plus my problem, and this is what it would equal. Frustration, anger, hurt, pain, unforgiveness. Me plus my problem would equal anxiety and stress, because it's just me trying to deal with it. And it's just me, and I'm angry, and my feelings, and me, okay? But when I changed the equation, me changed, okay? Me plus my problem plus God equals peace. Because remember that verse? Because I would know that all things work together for good. Me plus my problem plus God equals tranquility and harmony and reconciliation and all the good things. When I add God into the equation, it gave me joy. I could handle the situation with joy. I could handle it with peace. I could handle it with forgiveness. And somehow when we gave this problem, here you go, a different equation, it changed me. It just did. And so instead of being disappointed and saddened and confused and frustrated and angry, what happened is I became hopeful and peaceful, knowing that God, who controlled this entire situation, was still involved. Because here the deal is, all of this was part of his story for the people involved. It just was. And I had to come to that conclusion that with God in the equation, that God was really honestly in this. And at the time, it didn't make sense, and I couldn't understand it. And looking back, now it makes total sense. It didn't back then. But it renewed my heart, knowing that with God in the equation, the answer to our problem would come out better than we ever expected. And without inserting God into this problem, I know I would be a completely different person. I know for me, I'd be bitter and unforgiving, and I'd always have, hard feelings about this person, and I'd be angry and spiteful, and I'd want revenge and retaliation. But putting God into the equation, my answer now, equals this is peace. It's peace. Peace because I know that God's hand is in it. And no matter what happens in life, good, bad, whatever, we can trust that God has a purpose behind it. And yet, how do we get there? Some of you are like, that's awesome. How do I get there? And the answer is this: you need to read the Bible. And I tell you that all the time, but I really seriously mean it. Because God has given us his Bible, the Word, it's the manual that he has given for living. And what happens is we see how he dealt with people in the Bible. And we could see how he dealt with the men and women, and how they learned from him. And we could see how he worked in their lives. And when we see that from the stories in the Bible, then we can see how he deals with us. And in the Bible, right where we're studying right now in Genesis, is the story, the life of Joseph. And like I said, they're not just little Bible stories. These are true events that happened, that God changed their life. And through changing their life, it shows us he can change our life. But we're going to find Joseph, who literally has been through more storms, more hopeless situations, more despair than most of us will ever know. And yet we're going to learn that he lived his life doing one thing, and that is this: he added God into his equation. And because he did that, he was able to live his life with a completely different perspective than most people around him. And that's what we're trying to get through with the life of Joseph. We want to live like Joseph. We want to respond to our trials and our problems just like Joseph did. Because if we do, most people around us will be like, why are you acting like that? That's so awesome that you're living like that when that person hurts you so bad. We're supposed to be different as followers of Jesus. Now for us, thousands of years later, Joseph is the perfect example for us to follow. Because he refused to let all these negative circumstances destroy his life or his peace. Because with God in the equation, he knew there was always a purpose to his pain. And that might be a word for you. So many people look back to their past and they're like, but that person hurt me and that person did that to me and I was abused and I did this and yet you listen and it's affecting your life today. You need to stop, all right, and recognize, okay, God was doing something. I don't understand it. I don't really know why that happened, but I want to use it for good. Because God, what can I do to point people to Jesus even though that person did that to me? And that's where we're supposed to be going with this. So let's start Genesis 37, verse 1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. All right, we'll put our little, I always say this, our dysfunctional family tree up here. Jacob, of course, the love of his life was Rachel. You'll see her up there. They have two children, Joseph being one of them, Benjamin being the other one. Rachel, we saw last week, died in childbirth having Benjamin, so super sad for him. But then you look over to the left and you see all of these other brothers. Now, Joseph and Benjamin are the babies of the family compared to, Dan and Naphtali and, Gad and Asher, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar. Like, there's a whole bunch of boys that are way older than him. And he's growing up in this family as the favored son of his father, Jacob. And that's not a good place to be because Jacob's favoritism towards Joseph brought on so much dysfunction into this household. Keep going here, the verse says, Joseph, a young man of 17, so now we know he's 17 years old, he was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now, this is a problem, because either Joseph was a tattletale, okay, or maybe the boys were really doing something stupid that he was like, I think Dad needs to know about this. Because, remember, we already know two of the boys went on a mass, are murderers. They murdered a whole town of men. So these guys kind of seem really rough around the edges. And, Joseph being 17 and one of the youngest, maybe this scared him. We just don't know. So when he would go and give, Jacob a bad report, the boys were angry, understandably, because they knew this in verse 3, Genesis 37:3. Now Israel, or Jacob, loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also, we made him a tunic of many colors. Bad deal. Now, nobody can do the story of Joseph better than the skit guys, especially about this colored jacket. So, this is funny, and watch this.
Joe?
Oh.
Joe?
Hey, Dad. Hey. Oh, I see you still got that limp.
Yeah, old wrestling wound right there. Yeah. All right, let me look at you, boy. Oh, yeah, you're my favorite. You are my favorite, Joe.
Thanks, Dad. Thanks.
You are such my favorite that I made you something.
Oh,
Made you a coat.
Oh.
Made you a coat. Look at that. Yeah, you like that, huh? You like that? I made you a coat. Of many different colors, because I couldn't just pick one. I had to do it all. Yeah.
You could have picked one.
No. Woo!
Wow, that is,
You
Dad,
like it?
this is so nice. It's so nice. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to fold it real neatly and put it in a drawer where no one can see it and where it will not get hurt. I'll just do that. Is that cool?
Oh, I see. Oh. So you don't want to wear my coat, huh?
What?
Oh, no big deal. Don't wear your papa's coat that he made you. That's fine. Took me twice as long because I have this limp, but don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry about a thing. All I did was wrestle God so you could have favor and blessings, but no, don't you worry. Deceive my own brother, hairy thing, just to try to, make my family a little bit better. Don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry about a thing. Don't try to...
What is this feeling inside?
Oh, yeah. That's an order of guilt with a little side of shame that I made for you right there, yeah.
How do I make it go away?
Well, you don't. You just rearrange it in your life. That's all there is to it. But here's what you do. You want to please Papa, don't you? Want to please your Papa? Then put on the coat. Want to please Papa? Please
Okay,
Papa.
fine. Okay, Papa, don't preach, okay? I'm in trouble deep, but I've made up my mind. I'm gonna wear the coat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That is nice. You know, back in my day, for us to see colors like that, we had to bang our head against a wall. Yeah. But you just get it for free because you're my favorite.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think?
I think it looks like a Care Bear threw up on me.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. I want you to wear that around with pride because you're my favorite.
Yeah, I get it, Captain Guilts-a-Lot. I get it, all right?
Hey, your brothers know you're my favorite.
I think they do.
I'm gonna go tell them.
No, you don't have to.
He's my favorite!
And he was his favorite. And look, Jacob had no problem telling his other sons that Joseph was his favorite, and that tended to cause some problems between Joseph and his brothers.
Now, this is where I would say, what is wrong with Jacob? Why is he doing this? Because this is where the problem starts, with Jacob making it clear to the older sons that Joseph and Benjamin were his favorites. And you go, what kind of father does that? I know we have 5 boys, and I'll tell you, we learned that the importance of treating all our kids the same, even though they're not the same. And this is like you may have children or grandchildren, know that all your kids are completely different because God created them different. He created them with different personalities, different interests. Some of them are quiet, some of them are loud, some of them play the violin, some play hockey. We have some in our family, like one of our kids is like a brainiac, just like totally smart. One is a salesman. One is a better manager than he is anything else. One is completely computer savvy. So we realize that they're all different with different gifts. And the best advice we can give you is to embrace those kids and grandkids for who God made them to be, with their gifts and talents. Because if we don't, this could happen. Look at verse 4. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to them. Here's another Skit Guys video that you have to see about this.
Hey, Simeon.
Hey, Joe, what's going on?
Just wearing my coat.
Yeah, you've been...
Do you see the coat Dad gave me?
Yeah, I see it. Yeah, you've been wearing that sucker around town all the time.
I know, it is so cool.
I don't know about that. No, yeah.
Jealous.
Not really. No.
Hey, did Dad give you a coat?
No, he didn't give me or our other brothers coats after we realized we couldn't measure up in Dad's eyes compared to you. We just stopped caring, I guess.
Oh, man, that's crazy. I stopped listening to you a few minutes ago. But anyway, what I've learned is it's really all about me. So, in fact, speaking of me, I'm glad you brought it up. Here's the thing. I had this dream the other night. Do you ever have dreams?
Verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. And he said, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. Now, I don't know why Joseph shared that dream with them. Not a good idea. His brothers in verse 8 said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Verse 9, then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? Like, this made no sense. He's 17. He's a kid. And I don't know why he said his wife, because, Joseph's mom was already dead at this particular time, but there could be a couple things going on here, just a big picture that, everyone's going to bow down to him, or it could mean Jacob's wife at the moment, which was most likely Leah. Verse 11 says this: his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept this matter in mind. Now, this actually puts a pretty bad light on Joseph. And the question always is, was he just kind of a cocky little teenager that relished in the fact that his daddy loved him the most? Did he really honestly believe that he would rule over his brothers one day? Or was Joseph just completely naive? Like, was he excited, like he had this dream and he thought it was kind of funny and he sat down to, have a conversation with his brothers? But I'll tell you, his brothers did not find this funny at all. Watch another video from the skit, guys.
Do you ever have dreams?
No, we stopped dreaming too ever since,
Yeah, well, anyway, again, I don't care. Yeah. But here's the deal, okay? I had this dream. It was so crazy. Like, in my dream, like, I was awesome, which seems real. And you guys were all, like, bowing down to me, I mean, can you imagine how cool that would be? Like, there's me, and you guys bowing down to me, and all of a sudden this music started playing, and it was all like, go, 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 Joseph, you know what I mean. Go, 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 Joseph, here in my dream. What do you think about that?
That's what I think about that. And that's what they did think about that. These brothers, they got jealous. They were just disenchanted with life. Instead of focusing on them and what God had for them, they focused so much on Joseph and what he had. Instead of getting better, they got bitter.
Now, as funny as that is, this whole idea of little arrogant Joseph, it doesn't seem to fit with his character as we see later on. So either he was just acting like a bratty 17-year-old, which we've all been there with our kids, or he really honestly just didn't know what it meant. And if you read a lot of commentaries, they actually come down on both sides of that. So I don't even have an answer for you. But Joseph does go back and tell his father things, and I fault Jacob for that, his dad, for putting his son into this really, really bad situation. Like, hey, Joseph, go check on your brothers and let me know what they're doing. Like, I don't know, but you can see why Joseph's brothers hated him. So Joseph has a dream. Now, back then, God communicated a lot to people through dreams and visions. And the reason why is because they didn't have a Bible like we did. Like, the Bible hadn't even been written for them. So here's what you just need to know about this. A vision is something that you see when you're awake. Most people will tell me, like, I had a vision and they were awake, and it's almost like a movie screen coming right across your eyes. So that would be kind of what is considered a vision. A dream is what happens with, like when Joseph, he's sleeping and he has this dream, but it's so powerful that he knows that it's something not just like, I dreamed last night that Rob and I were going to jump out of like a 30-story building. And I was like, what? And I woke up thinking that was weird. So that clearly was just what I ate before I went to bed. It had nothing to do, like God wasn't trying to tell me anything from there. But when God spoke, people would know it. All right. So we see it in different places all through the Bible. New Testament, here's one instance, Matthew 1:20. This was when Joseph, Mary's husband, came before he has a dream. Watch this. But when he considered this, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, okay, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child who has been conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. So Joseph got that message in a dream. The Old Testament, we see it in 1 Kings 3:5. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night and said, ask me what you wish and I will give it to you. So dreams were just one way that God spoke to people. He also spoke through prophets in the Old Testament. So the question is today, does God still speak in dreams like he did back then? And I'm going to say, maybe, maybe not. Okay, and I'll explain that. Hebrews 1 says this: in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. In other words, he spoke to people through prophets, through dreams, that's how God spoke back then. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things and through whom he made the universe. In other words, God has now given us Jesus. We're on the other side of the cross. So now we have him, we have the Bible, we have all of these things where now we can take, it doesn't have to be through a dream. We see it on paper, okay? God has spoken to us on paper. We also have the Holy Spirit. Like, they didn't have the Holy Spirit back in the Old Testament like we do. Like, he lives within us, he leads us, he guides us, he gives us thoughts, he moves us in different directions. So it's not like we need a lot of dreams nowadays because we have the Holy Spirit and the Bible in front of us. Now, with that being said, I do believe that God still does come to people, like we see it in the Middle East. Jesus is coming to people in dreams, where the Bible, there is no Bible. They have no way of ever knowing Jesus at all because they've never read his word. It's illegal. Where you've got countries where there's 99% Muslims, you can't have a Bible or you're going to die. So Jesus has been showing up in dreams to people in the Middle East. So I think I don't discount dreams at all in places where God can't really get to them any other way. So there's that. We do see this in Acts regarding the last days. Look at Acts 2:17. It says, in these last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people, and your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, your old men will dream dreams. So it does seem that, as the end times get closer and closer, the dreams and visions will become a thing again. So, but back in the time of Joseph, this was just the way that God communicated to people. Verse 12 says this, now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. I think Jacob is a nutcase. Why in the world would you send your son on a trip like this, knowing all of his brothers hate him? Like, I just don't get what Jacob's thinking. Now, he sends them to a place called Shechem. Now, if you've been studying Genesis, you realize a few weeks ago, Shechem was a problem. Okay, so look at this map here, and you can see Hebron down there is where, Jacob lives, and that's where all the boys lived. Now, you go all the way up to that town, Shechem. That was the town where Jacob's daughter, Dinah, was raped. And that's the town where Jacob's two sons went on that murderous rampage and killed all the men. And you can see right there that that's where he was sending Joseph. But if you remember the story, Jacob bought a piece of land there, so they must have had, their animals, and maybe that's where they were raising them. But I don't know why Jacob would do that. Verse 14. So he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and then bring word back to me. And Jacob should not have done that. We know that. But here's the cool thing, is that we can see the whole picture. We can see the whole picture that God was using even Jacob's favoritism for Joseph, and even Jacob's sons, their hatred of Joseph, that God can still use all of those things. And he did use those things to get Joseph where God needed him. He goes on in verse 14 and says, then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, now this is about 50-ish miles, so it's a 2 to 3 day trip just walking. Verse 15 says, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? And he replied, well, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're grazing their flocks? They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. So we'll put the map back up here so you can see this. They were in Shechem. They even go farther up to this place called Dothan. It's about 15 miles north. Speaking of walking, I don't know why this always makes me laugh. There was this kid, he was on his 16th birthday. He said, Dad, I'm 16. Can I get my license now? Can I drive the family car? And his dad's like, well, it takes a lot of maturity to actually do that. So I need to know that you're this responsible. And he says, the one thing that you can do to show me, I actually have a couple things. He said, first, I want you to bring up your grades. That'll tell me you're responsible. And he says, then I want you to make sure you read your Bible every day. That'll tell me you're responsible. And he said, then I need you to get a haircut because your hair looks horrible. And that'll tell me that you're growing up and you'll be responsible. So the son begins fulfilling all of his father's requirements, and his report card came out. It's like, Dad, look, I got all A's and B's. And he says, now can I drive the family car? And he's like, son, that's really good, but tell me about your Bible. Have you been reading your Bible? And he's like, Dad, I've been reading my Bible every day. He goes, that's awesome. That's 2 out of 3. He said, well, when are you going to get your hair cut? And he said, since I've been reading my Bible, he said, I started seeing that, I don't understand why I have to get my hair cut. He goes, Jesus and Moses and all these guys, he goes, they had long hair. And his father looked at him and said, that's right, son, but they also walked everywhere they went. I go, good point, okay? So Joseph has been walking. There's my point. So Joseph sees his brothers. Look at verse 18. But they see him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Imagine the hatred they had to have for their younger brother. It was so intense that killing him was actually an option. You're like, what? Who thinks like that? Verse 19, here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes to his dreams. You can picture them all laughing. And remember, these are older men at this time, and they were probably tough. I would say 2 of them, murdered a whole bunch of men on their own. So these are kind of scary guys. But I think their whole point was, we're never going to bow down to him. I don't care what dreams he has. He can forget that. But what they didn't count on was God and how big Joseph's God really was. That they could not do anything to Joseph that God did not allow. Look at verse 21. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Now, this is 1 son out of the 10. So 9 of them are for killing Joseph, and here is Reuben. He said, let's not take his life, he said. So we'll put our little dysfunctional family tree back up, and you can see Reuben is the oldest of Leah. That's Jacob's firstborn. And so you've got all the other brothers that want to kill, and he's just like, no, let's not do that. Verse 22, don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. Now, Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. Now, I kind of gained a lot of respect for Reuben after this because he knew that losing Joseph would absolutely kill his dad. And he also knew he was kind of in trouble. From last week, we saw how he slept with his dad's concubine, and that was a problem. So maybe he's just trying to get back in his dad's good graces. Like, we don't really know, but however it played out, he would let the brothers throw Joseph in a pit, but then he would come back and rescue him and take him back home. Verse 23, so when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. Now, I have 2 back-to-back little videos here that I wanted to show you. One about a cistern, what it looked like. And another one was just like a kid's video, but it really shows you the anger of these older brothers. But because of the copyright stuff, I can't actually show it to you on this video. So I will put links below, and if you want to click on those, they're well worth watching. So it kind of gives you an understanding of what a cistern looked like back then, or how horrible these brothers really were. So you can't. I think that the thing with the one video, it shows you how terrified Joseph had to have been. All these older big brothers pick him up and throw him in the cistern. He had to have been so afraid. And the Bible doesn't say at this point exactly what Joseph was feeling, but 20 years later, when he comes in face to face with his brothers, he overhears them saying this in Genesis 42:21. And this gives us an idea of how Joseph was feeling at this time. He said, they said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life. But we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. For 20 years, they knew that what they did to Joseph was horrible, absolutely horrible. Verse 25 says this, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. So Judah comes up with a really good idea. All right, so let's look at our family dysfunctional tree again. You see Reuben, who wants to save Joseph. You have Simeon and Levi, who are the two murderers. And then you have Judah. Judah decides to come up with an entirely different plan. Verse 26, Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he's our brother, okay? Our own flesh and blood. And all the brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. I want you to imagine yourself being this pampered child like Joseph was, where you're the apple of your daddy's eye, and all of your brothers, all they want to do is kill you. They hate you that much. And they not only hate you, they just sell you. They sell you to traders on their way to Egypt, where Joseph would be sold as a slave. I was thinking about this one day because we had a business in China with all of our boys. And I was thinking, our youngest, his name is Micah. And so they would always, go to China. But I thought how this would look in like our lifetime would be like sending their brother to China, but then, contacting the China authorities and getting his passport taken away and having him thrown in a Chinese prison. Like it's kind of would be the same way. Thankfully, Micah's brothers love him and would never do that. But that kind of felt, I kind of understood that they all were together, and if they sent one away, and that would be horrible. But that's pretty much what happened to Joseph. And I assume he's on this trader whatever wagon, and he has to be so confused and so hurt and so angry. And the question is, what would you do? And some of you get that because something big happened in your life and you're just like, what just happened? But what would you do? Like, how would you handle the rest of your life knowing how devastating your past has been? But maybe you have felt that kind of betrayal. Maybe, like I said, you were fired from a job, your spouse walked out on you, someone stole from you or lied about you, or maybe you were abused as a child and accused of something you didn't do. And so as followers of Jesus, the difference is we have to look at our problems and our past differently. We have to look at the bad things that are going on, happened in our past, or maybe that's happening now with a different perspective. A future perspective. Knowing, all right, God, you're doing something. You're in this. You have not forgotten me. I don't get it right now, but I know you're doing something. Yes, my world feels like it's falling apart, but you know what? I'm going to trust you that you're doing something that I can't possibly even see. Because here's what you and I need to know when something bad happens, like what's happening to Joseph, is that he has a purpose for your life. God has a purpose for your life, even when things don't make any sense. Because just like God is using Joseph's life and his story thousands of years later, and we're reading it at Bible study and we're learning how God is intricately involved in his life, we can see how God used Joseph, and here's what you need to know. God can use you also. But Joseph had to let God do that, and you have to let God use you. And when you can add God, that 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, into the equation of whatever's going on in your life, you can have peace knowing this, that God is doing something. He just is. And you can have so much peace knowing that. Verse 29, when Reuben returned to the cistern, he must have gone away for something, and saw that Joseph was not there. He tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped it in the blood. They took the ornamental robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." I mean, look at all the lies and the deception. Verse 33, he recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Verse 34, then Jacob tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth and mourned for his son for many days. And all his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son." So his father wept for him. It is a heartbreaking scene that these boys could do this to their father, and yet I think Jacob brought it on himself. Okay, he treated his kids unfairly, and he brought all this on. But it's so cool to know that God had a plan all along and used all of this weird, dysfunctional things in his life, but God had a purpose. And when you can put that in your life, you can get through anything. But here's what we know about lying and covering up sin, and it's this, that it doesn't go away. It just doesn't. You know that, I know that. We see this in another part of the Bible. When King David had his affair with Bathsheba, she was a married woman whose husband Uriah was actually off fighting in the war for King David. David sees her, bathing on the roof, and is like, "She's beautiful. I want her." And he has an affair, and she gets pregnant, and David tries to cover it up. Okay, lies and adultery. Like, he's literally trying to cover up the whole scene. And so he brings her husband home from the war, and in hopes that he would sleep with her. All the people in the town could see, like, "Oh, Uriah came home." And so when she does show up pregnant, they'll be like, "Oh, remember that time he came back from the war? Yeah, that must be when she got pregnant." But Uriah had way too much integrity, and he refused to sleep with Bathsheba. And so David decides to put Uriah on the front lines to make sure that he dies. Because when you can't cover up sin, it gets worse and worse and worse. David swoops in, he marries Bathsheba, but the consequences for him would be lifelong. God says, "I'm sorry, David, but what you did was so horrific." And he's like, "You know what? The consequences will be forever. The baby that Bathsheba has will die. The sword will never depart from your house. If you think Jacob has a dysfunctional family, you should see David's. His is a mess, okay? One of David's daughters was raped by a stepbrother. Another brother was murdered by another stepbrother. David's son tried to take his throne and kicked him out." Like, this just goes on and on for the life of David. And it stemmed from the moment he said, "Hey, that's a beautiful woman bathing on the roof. Go get her for me." And that's when the lies and the deception started. And these 10 brothers of Joseph, their life became a disaster when they said, "Hey, let's sell our baby brother Joseph to these slave traders and just lie to Dad and tell him that, oh, poor Joseph was killed by an animal." But here is what David knew about sin, and here's what Joseph's brothers knew about their sin for the next 20 years. Psalm 32 verse 3 says this, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer." It's like when we sin and we try to cover it up, it's like God's hand, if we're followers of Jesus, his hand is heavy upon us, and we just can't get out from underneath our sin unless we confess and come to terms with it. This is what they should have done. Verse 5. David says this about his sin with Bathsheba. He said, "Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin." And this is such a great verse because all these boys felt so guilt-ridden for 20 years over their sin, but it's because they never confessed it. They never came to their father and said, "Dad, this is what we did. We're so sorry, God. We did this to you. We're so sorry for that." But I love how this verse says that God forgives the guilt of our sin. But it begins with confession. F.B. Meyer writes this, Year passed after year, but the years could not obliterate from their memories that look. This is about Joseph and the brothers. Those cries, that scene in the green glen of Dothan, surrounded by the tall cliffs, overarched by the blue sky, whose expanse was lit up by a meridian sun. They tried to lock up the skeleton in their most secret cupboard, but it contrived to come forth to confront them even in their guarded hours. Sometimes they thought they saw that agonized young face in their dreams. They heard that piteous voice wailing in the night wind. The old father who mourned for his son as dead was happier than they were who knew him to be alive. One crime may thus darken a whole life. That's a sad, scary place to be. Verse 36 says this. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. And Joseph would then be on this journey to do what we have to learn to do, and that is to add God into the equation of our life. Because you plus your problem, and then adding God into your problem will change your life. It did for me. When I got angry at this person who hurt someone, I had to stop and say, no, God is in this. When I would feel bitter and betrayed, I'd stop and say, no, God will use this. And when I couldn't see a future with anything good to come out of it, I stopped and said, God, I will trust you even though it makes no sense to me. And I assume many of you are right there. So today your challenge and your choice will be this: to live your equation out, me plus my problem, is going to equal anxiety and stress. That's not how you want to live out your equation. You want to live it out, changing it to me plus my problem plus God. And the answer will equal is peace. And we're going to learn that all through the life of Joseph. Because he could have hated his brother, done everything he could to be bitter and get back at him and let it fester and ruin his life. But for some reason, he never did. Somehow he knew this. He knew he would have been a different person if he didn't add God into every storm that came into his life. And so whatever storm you're going through right now, add God into it. And I guarantee when the storm passes, you will know him better. You will be closer to him. You will trust him more. And you will have way more peace than you ever could imagine. Look at your storms past today. Look forward to a time in the future when the storm passes and the sun's going to start shining again. Through the storm, learn what God wants to teach you. Through the storm, learn what God wants to teach you. And for Joseph, the greatest part of this horrible scene is that God was in the midst of it because God had a plan. And I'm hoping that whatever you're going through, you can get like Kevin did in the beginning video, this like 30,000 foot view of your circumstances. Knowing this, that God has not forgotten you and that God is intricately involved in your life. And things may not make sense now, but God is always up to something. And my hope and prayer is that you stand on that. I hope you have a really good day today.